Today I'm speaking with Chuck Swindoll Jr. Chuck, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, thank you, Tim. It's great to be here, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
I am so glad to meet you. And I got to say, before we even start with your bio, if I can just add this, your father, who we'll talk about, I'm sure, a couple times in this interview, Chuck Swindoll, who's a pastor, he influenced my life majorly for about 25 to 30 years of my life. I have listened to like thousands of his sermons, literally. And I've
Wow.
read many, many, many of his books. His book, The Grace Awakening, I probably read more times than I can count. And so his life when I was a Christian was very transformative. So it's really kind of weird and almost like a flipping of the tables to finally meet you and to hear more information about what it was like growing up in his home. But anyway, going into your bio, Chuck grew up in California, then moved to Tennessee, and now lives in Washington State. He has an engineering degree, which he used for many years. He married his high school sweetheart, Jenny, and they've been married now for 33 years this year. He
Yeah.
served with his dad for 15 years in church ministry, and toward the end of that time, around 2012, he faced a cancer diagnosis, which began a season of major shifts in his worldview. He's also an author. The book is called Elucidating Christianity, A Heretic's Descent, Triangulating Dysfunctional Religion. I'll have the link for that beneath this video, so please do go check it out and support his great work. He's also a YouTuber focused on awareness and expanding our consciousness. And I'll have the link for his YouTube channel beneath this video as well. So like and subscribe. And that's what I know about you so far. Before we get into your story and the meat of all that, could you just tell us more about yourself and some fun things?
Sure thing. Well, first of all, nobody knows this, but I'm a massive Formula One fan. I've been a Formula One fan since I was 16 years old. I love it. Don't like really any other form of racing, but I love Formula One. I love to garden. I absolutely love to garden. And I've been doing that for many years. I actually built my first greenhouse last year, which was great. And it actually lasted the winter. And sometimes we get a bit of snow up here. So I must have some kind of good engineering skills to this day, I hope. And yeah, I enjoy writing. I love writing. I love interacting with the public and helping others. That's kind of a little synopsis of me and my interests for sure.
That's awesome. Could I ask, for Washington State, are you on the side that's closer to the ocean or more inland?
I'm Pacific Northwest. I'm about 45 minutes from the ocean. Yeah, it's
Nice.
beautiful here. I absolutely love it. We needed to move to the forest when I contracted cancer. Let's see, it's been about 12 years now. You have to leave the environment that gave you cancer. That was just a basic principle for me. And so we did. I was living in suburbia, Texas, part of the yuppie culture, the whole thing. And it's where I raised my kids. But at the same time, it was really polluted. And I'm a runner. I run about 10, 15 miles a week. And so I'm outside a lot, and just breathing all of that in and being around that so often eventually got to me. And so, yeah, we live now in a forest, and it's very beautiful and quiet, and a much different life than I used to live, for sure.
Hmm. Well, I am more than a little jealous. That's very, very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Well, I'm so glad you're here. We love to invite people, if I could, to just have you share your story. Take us back to the earliest days. How did you get exposed to the Bible and Christianity? I obviously know a little bit about that with your dad, but I'd just love to hear from your side. Like, what was it like growing up in his home, and specifically, what was it like hearing about the message of the Bible and of the gospel?
Yeah, I really consider my foray into religion as more like an indoctrination because I mean, I was in a very powerful individual's family. My is a powerful man in the Christian industry. And so as a child, you want to obey your parents and or at least I did, you want to please them. You want to have a positive interaction with them. And because in Christianity, because it's such an encapsulating religion, you really, as a child, in many ways, unless you're sort of an Alan Watts or Joseph Campbell type, you're going to fall right into it, and you're going to be going to Sunday school from the moment literally you're in the cradle, and that will be the world that you will know if you're in a conservative Christian home. And there's just no tolerance for any other kind of religious thought, any kind of religious leader. In the way I was raised, really, it was just the Bible and just Jesus. And there's really no other quote unquote authority or person in your life that should be guiding you in that spiritual way. So it was very, very tight in religion. And it was like that. I became a Christian when I was 4. And I still remember my sister Colleen. I have 3 siblings. My sister Colleen, we were very close when I was little. And she actually led me to Christ. And then I went upstairs and I asked Jesus in my heart with my dad. And it was the very classical, normal, often common way that people walk into Christianity. Most Christians, at least most of the ones that I grew up with and in the church that I was in, were raised that way. It was just the way it was. And the thing that you don't know, this is a key in for the insight for the whole thing. The thing that you don't know when you're raised like that is you don't know that there's any other world. Because, I mean, you're not aware of anything else. So if you are really entrenched, I mean, I went to a private Christian school. I was in church 3 times a week. That's the world. So a world outside of Christianity at that age, it's like, I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what that means. And you're so programmed in Christianity to see any other religious quote unquote figure as somehow evil, tied into Satan or tied into just something anti-Christian. And so it's really put into you to fear any thinking outside of the box. And since I was so entrenched from such a young age, really that's the way it was for me. And I didn't know anything else. And really our family was pretty normal, for all intents and purposes. I mean, there was nothing weird going on. I had great relationship with my father and my mother growing up. There was no issue there. I got along fine with my siblings, though there's a huge age difference. There's 9 years between my brother and me, but there was nothing crazy going on. So there was nothing happening in the religion that where I was like being abused or someone was molesting me at church or something. I had none of those kinds of stories. So it wasn't a nasty thing like that. It was just the way I was raised. And I was like that until I was nearly a 40-year-old man. And I had completely gone through all of life, a devout, dedicated Christian. And there was no other way of being, in my opinion. And I was I'm a pretty strong person. My voice is, I say what I feel. I say what comes out. And so as a Christian, when I thought I was right, there's a whole lot of self-righteousness that goes along with that. And you become, in many ways, a spiritual narcissist. And that's really what I was. I was a spiritual narcissist. And it really wasn't until I got cancer and a little bit before then, when I had dabbled in some magic mushrooms and so forth, that those things began to break down the thinking pathways that had always been my go-to growing up, because you never think outside the box and you literally get neurological pathways developed in the brain whereby the electrical function, the DC that runs your brain, follows those same pathways. And it sometimes, in many ways, I think personally, a person will have to have some type of crisis in their life to ever think outside of those pathways, because why would you change? Why would you develop your thinking past those pathways? Because it's so easy just to answer all those questions and never really have to be challenged mentally when you're indoctrinated.
With your growing up in your dad's, shadow, as well as the church there, knowing what I know of him, and I don't know him personally. I've never seen him even in person, like from a distance, but I've spent sort of thousands of hours with your dad from afar. I know sort of what I think you would say to this, but what were you taught specifically by him and by the church about the issues of sin and salvation and the gospel? And if someone, you mentioned being led to the Lord by your sister, if you had to explain it when you got a little bit older, and were able to be theologically more articulate and grounded, what would you have said was your understanding of the way to have peace with God? What is the gospel?
Really, the entire seed of the religion starts with the idea of sin. That's really the seed beginning. And it is really from the identifying as a sinner that one forms a relationship to God, and God is outside and separate from creation and acts like a watchmaker to make sure that it all goes okay. So the universe is only stable. You are only alive because God specifically takes care of that from outside the world that we're in. And so the world that we're in is a filthy place because it's filled with sin. Adam and Eve fell. They chose to go against the teachings of Yahweh, of God in the Garden of Eden. And that was the seed, the germ seed point for the whole beginning of the quote unquote fall of man. And so all of humankind, every single person, is fallen from God and separate from God because of sin. Sin is, again, it's the key, it's the cornerstone, keystone to establishing that in the to be convert or the convert, they must identify as a sinner. That's the beginning point. And then from that point, you then form your understanding. And so in Christianity, because you're a sinner, the first step is the blood or the grace or the forgiveness of Jesus, who came to earth as God's son for you. So because the penalty of sin is death, theologically, that means that something has to die because you were born, because your eternal soul has been tainted by the sin of those long before you. So in other words, there's nothing you can do about it. You're a sinner and you must adhere and follow the teachings of this very specific religion called Christianity.
And did you have the hell part of it woven in? Were you taught that you literally, like, failure to believe in Jesus as your savior would lead you to hell?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That if you did not believe that you were a sinner, or believe that you need forgiveness, and you never engaged Jesus, God, in that way through this forgiveness, grace idea, absolutely. The day that you die, you go to hell, and you literally, the way it was taught to me was, you literally burn. Like if you were to jump into a fire pit filled with coals, and you just sat there and burned. That's the picture you're given. So that if you don't believe this, that is your destiny, and you will be there forever, and there is no hope. You will never get out. So for trillions and trillions of years, you will literally just burn. And because that's the penalty for sin. It all goes back again to sin. That's the theologic behind the whole thing. So the key to breaking out is breaking past that idea. So, but yes, that's the ultimatum you're given. And that's why when you're a 4-year-old, when that picture is put into your head, it's terrifying. I remember crying sometimes. I was so afraid that I wasn't a Christian, that I hadn't said the right prayer, that I hadn't said the right words, that Jesus wouldn't. I literally lived terrified of that all through my youth, because the pit of hell is awaiting those that don't choose the right way. So yes, it's terrifying. Your world is filled with fear, and then you're supposed to just replace all that with the love of Jesus and just picturing yourself forgiven. And therefore, there's your peace. Your peace is that you're forgiven. Your peace is that God no longer sees you as a sinner. He sees you as a forgiven sinner. And so God can now interact and talk with you because you've accepted this gift from Jesus. And so there's a whole spiritual mechanic that goes along with it. It's a tremendous rigor that you adhere to in order to stay in right relationship. And by golly, you can even, in the way I was raised, if you fall too far, if you go too far, like you sin too much, there might even be question if you're really a Christian, because could a Christian really be sinning that much? And it's this unstable, constantly fidgeting with it movement that is undergirding your whole spiritual premise. And it's a tough way to go. I got to tell you, once I began to break out of it, it began to become really clear, like, holy smokes, no wonder I was so caught into this thing, because you're just filled with fear all the time.
Now, when you were at that point where you did admit that you were a sinner and that you couldn't earn your way to heaven, you had to have a substitute. You had to have Jesus as your savior, and that you did believe that. You did accept him as your Lord and Savior, that he did, in fact, die in your place, and that you took him as your replacement. At that point, what was it like practically? Like, for a lot of us, we're going to be, of course, urged and have the example of like family devotions and youth group devotions and personal devotions and worship services. Did you feel like you really were, in your mind, developing a real relationship with a real divine person? And did you feel like you were talking to him and walking with him? Did it get, in the spiritual sense, did it get close and intimate and beautiful for you? Or like, what was that journey like as a young child and a teenager?
Yeah, the imagination is very massaged in these religions. And so, yes, you actually develop this imaginatory idea of God in your head. And some people actually hear a voice. I never personally heard a voice. That never happened. I never heard a voice in my head, but you begin, and because for me, it starts so young. It's very natural to develop this. So you develop this imaginary relationship with Jesus, and you literally, every day you're talking to this imaginative idea that you've created in your head of Jesus. And for most Christians, it is absolutely real, and they absolutely think that there is this Jesus figure that's there with them at all times, talking and listening and interacting. And this is cultivated and fostered as you go to church. And so when you, as a child, go to Sunday school, the leader at the church will talk about this, and will talk about this relationship that you have. And you tell Jesus your problems. And really, one of the toughest things that for me was when I left was sort of like losing that, because it becomes a dependency. Like when you have a problem, you immediately, as a Christian, you start thinking, okay, Jesus, can you help me out with this? I'm really frustrated in this. And he becomes like a personal friend, and you become completely attached, and the Christian cannot imagine a day where they're not interacting with this person. And it's really one of the ways using the imagination to capture a person, because the imagination is one of the strongest, or the strongest faculty you have as a human being. The creative faculty is one of the most powerful forms of force in the universe. I mean, we build skyscrapers, we build empires with the imagination. And so that is an incredibly powerful force inside the mind of the human being. And that is exactly what the religion exploits. It goes right to the imagination. And then this is cultivated and nurtured and fostered as you grow up as a child. And so it becomes very normal, completely normal, to be just in the middle of your day, and you're just in your car driving, and you just start having a conversation with Jesus, an imaginary person that you think is there listening to you, and you'll sit for hours and talk this out. It's amazing. It's amazing. And this becomes completely normal. It is completely normalized. And in fact, like I said earlier, you'll be thought of as weird if you don't have some kind of conversation you're having where you're praying to Jesus. I mean, even Paul said, pray without ceasing. And so this is driven in. It's what I like to call inculcated into the person, which is driving in an idea or a concept repeatedly, day after day after day, and it forms what's called an egregore, which is a collective monster, so you could say, that's developed by the society through the ideas put into the society's head. And so the Christian society, has this enormous icon figure called Jesus, and it's a huge egregore, and it's this imaginary creation that comes out of the idea of religion and the idea of being a sinner. And you have to have this friend in order to know God. And it's incredible. The dynamics of it are incredible when you get outside of it and you start looking at it from a person outside the religion into it. It leaves you aghast with what you are actually seeing happening with these people who have developed this entire imaginary world, and they literally reject any other world but that Christian world. All other worlds, be it Buddhism, atheism, it doesn't matter. Everything else is rejected. And so it's really just a tight-knit society that's completely intolerant of any other thought. And that's how you capture all the congregation. That's how you capture these converts, is through this kind of thinking.
If I could just make one quick comment too, I think one of the interesting, very scary dynamics of this is they get you in this, and they make you believe it's real. But there's sort of this implication, even if it's not directly stated, this implication that anything else but this worldview is, of course, false. It's stupid. Like, why would you want to leave? Like Jesus said, or the disciple said, to who else would we go? You alone have the words of life. And you get the sense that there's this idea that's again very implicit, that if you were to leave this, life becomes meaningless. And I've likened it to this: if you were to have somebody, say you didn't have too much money in life, and someone convinces you that they are an absolute trillionaire, they're just among the top 1% of the world, and they write you a check for $1 trillion, and they convince you can cash this. This will absolutely cash. And while you're on the way to the bank, gloriously happy, you're imagining all these things that are going to happen in your life, that you're going to be able to do. And it just feels like all the burdens of all the financial issues of life are suddenly just gone for you. Your life is blissful. And you get to the bank and you find out it's a fake check. And you immediately get to the point where like you're ultra depressed because you're like, I thought I had a good check here. And they're like, no, that's that's just the homeless guy that writes them all the time. He just having fun with you. It's not real. And that's kind of what Christianity does. It gives you this fake check and you get convinced it's real. And once you lose it, if you really put yourself in the frame of mind of rationality, you never really had it. You only ever had a simple piece of paper that was only worth what the paper it's on. You never had $1 trillion. You're not even close to it. But because you get convinced you have it, you get ultra depressed thinking, look at all of that I've lost. And I think that's where for a lot of us we struggle when we first deconvert, because we were convinced we were talking to somebody. Like you said, we're talking to an idea, but we're talking to a person who's loving us, who's done all these things for us in history and in the future. The kingdom is waiting for us, the afterlife's waiting for us. It's our everything. The glories of the gospel, the glories of the kingdom, the glories of heaven, the glories of our Lord and Savior. It means the world to us. And all these things that were so beautiful, and suddenly the beauty's gone, the relationship's gone, the afterlife's gone, and you do get at least temporarily depressed because you're like, oh my goodness, I've lost so much. Like, you have to get to the point where you realize you didn't lose so much. You never had that stuff. It was all just your imagination. Mm-hmm. And it's very insidious in the sense that they make you think that if you walk away from this, you're pretty much walking into nothing but darkness and depression and emptiness or demonic activity. It's like, no, I'm just walking away from mythology, but it's such a hard thing because you're so vested. You've got all your chips on this one number. It's like if this one number doesn't win, there's no reason to live. And I've heard people say that, like, if Christianity were not true, I don't want to live. Like, yes. Oh my gosh, because some homeless guy gave you a bad check, you don't want to live anymore? Like, are you kidding me? Think this through,
Well, objectivity is a tough one, Tim, when it comes to these kind of things. And a person being able to be objective when they're literally living in an imaginary world, that's a tough ask. And that is one of the biggest reasons why when I talk to people, you just said it, they're like, well, then what is God? What is love? What is Jesus? Why? Like, I'm a sinner. Like, it becomes very murky and muddy really quick when that imaginatory idea begins to break apart, and it's extremely scary. I remember thinking to myself, if I don't pray to Jesus, who do I pray to? I'm still trying to go back to the way that I've always identified. And that is one of the biggest reasons why I found when I talk to folks who are still in it that they don't leave. It's like, well, what then am I going to go to? And this is one of the tragedies, is that's that intolerance kicking in where they have never thought outside the box, so they can't even conceptualize the idea of life without that religion. And that is where the crisis really needs to take place, because a crisis in someone's life will force them to think outside the box. So they'll walk into that scary space that's, I'm not usually here, I'm out of place, this feels weird, I'm thinking differently, what's going on? And to initiate that really often initiates that objectivity that they can't have when they're so locked inside of it. And so it's a really good point, Tim, in that's a major reason why people don't leave, because they're like, there's no problem. In fact, my problem has been fixed because I'm forgiven. So why am I going to rethink all these spiritual gymnastics I've been doing? I don't want to learn a new move. I don't want to learn a new instrument. I just want to stay with the stuff I'm comfortable with and I've always done. And that is really where the self-initiation has to take place, because nobody can convince you to leave. You will only listen to yourself. So you yourself have to come to the conclusion that, like you just said, Tim, like, if I bought into a fake check, is like, what is actually objectively happening here in my behavior and in my thought processes? What is really going on? And stepping outside that, stepping back, the self-responsibility that goes with that is tough for the Christian to accept, because they've always had the scapegoat of the religion. They can always just lean on it and depend on it and blame it. The whole thing, they can do whatever they want because it's this secondary imaginary identity that they have. And because it's imaginatory, you can kind of fit into that space, your problems, your issues, your goods, your bads, and so forth, and make it work for you. And so there's really no objective perspective going on here. It's just this imaginary idea. And so, yes, you're absolutely correct, Tim. That's a major hurdle that the new convert has to get over. Is that exactly?
Could I ask,
That
we just going back a little bit tighter to your actual story? What were some of the seeds? Like, I know we've sort of hit the punchline that we both deconverted, but like, what were going back before that point? What were some of the seeds as a teenager and a young adult before the cancer part of the story? And I want to get to that shortly, but what were any seeds that you remember, even if you at the time wouldn't have said, yes, this is leading me to question God, but when you look back at it, you'd say, that might have actually been an early seed. What were some of those things that just didn't sound right or didn't feel right to you?
probably the earliest one was the idea that if somebody hasn't heard of Jesus and they live their whole life and die and they never were even given the opportunity to hear the story to quote unquote save themselves through believing in Jesus, I never understood why or how that made sense, because I knew that there were all kinds of people in the world that would live, their whole life and die and never one time hear that they're a sinner, hear about Jesus, any of this stuff. And it was always told to me when I would ask my dad that he would say stuff like, well, they go to this special sort of purgatory holding tank and there's some kind of dialogue or there's something that's going to happen. And it's really weird because nobody could answer the question. My father couldn't answer straight because, I mean, it's pretty obscene what the real answer is, because the real answer theologically is tough luck.
Well, you're
Bummer
screwed.
Bob, they're gonna burn forever. Too bad. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the theology, because they didn't accept the gift. And you must, I mean, the whole thing is based on belief. And if you don't believe correctly, sorry, friend, you're out. And so that, I mean, even back to when I was young, I always thought, man, I got friends that are Hindu or Buddhist, and I know their parents are not telling them anything. They don't have any idea about this whole sin concept. And my heart went to them like, that person, they're going to be lost. My friend is going to burn in hell because they don't know the quote unquote truth. And so that, I would say, that would probably be one of the earliest things that would be in my mind that began to make me think I'm not so sure about this, but I
Did,
never pursued it because, you think that you're right when you're a Christian.
did you feel uncomfortable like addressing the doubts ever, in the sense of like, this is probably just Satan trying to tempt me or something like that?
There's some of that. I didn't grow up in a highly toxic environment in that sense of the devil's got you, Chuck, or you've played in the devil's playground. There wasn't a lot of devil talk when I was growing up. It wasn't portrayed as that. My dad, my parents, their portrayal of Christianity and how they convey that is just simply love, 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 love. Just everything's love, 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 love. So when when you have problems or issues, Jesus is love. Pray for Jesus' love Jesus, love God. It was always that idea. And so it's sort of this tidal effect where everything just falls into the same pit. And again, you're not really taught to think critically in Christianity. You're taught to obey. The Bible isn't asking your opinion. It's telling you. It's not seeking your approval. It's not expecting your proof. Those are the ideas that come out of the individual. The Bible is the truth. And so you never learn to think. You never learn, like I said earlier, you never get objective. You stay in this foreign, isolated world that is outside the critical thinker's idea. And that's why my father hates philosophy. He doesn't like discussing philosophy at all. And one of the key tenets of philosophy is learning to think for yourself, learning to objectively approach the world with an open mind and consciousness and awareness, and just see it for yourself and decide for yourself. Because the Christian is taught to think like the Bible teaches, not like that. You stay away from your own thoughts because your thoughts are from a sinner, from a devil. You can't trust them. You can trust the thoughts of the Bible. You trust the ways of the Bible. So you really dumb down in many senses because you only learn to think like a bot. You've got this book and you got this theology, and that's the final word. You never learn to think critically when you're really when you are indoctrinated into Christianity. And if you think about it, that makes complete sense, because if you're indoctrinated, well, your thought process is always constellating Christianity. It never leaves that. And when you do that from a 4-year-old, in my case, you have no critical thinking skills. That muscle has never been exercised. You've always been in a memorization situation where you memorize answers, you memorize verses, you memorize all the theology, and those become your answers. So these aren't actually your own independent thoughts. They're thoughts that have been inculcated into your mind, and then you're just a parrot, and you're just repeating what has been put into you week after week, day after day, being involved in the religion. And the further you go, the longer you're a Christian, the less and less and less your critical thinking skills exist. And so by the time you're 40 or 50, you have no ability at all to critically think. And that's why they'll say questions like, why would I ever leave Christianity? I mean, this has answered all my questions. I've got the eternity secured. I got my relationship with God worked out. I know who to pray to. I know the correct prayers. Like, why am I going to mess any of that up? And this is the critical factor in them that's dead. They have no critical thinking ability, so they can't ever get the idea of, what does it mean to actually be a sinner? Like, what am I actually believing here? And why do I think that about myself? And why do I think the world, a paradise, is fallen? Why? This is critical thinking that is non-existent in the Christian. And so that's the way it was for me until I got cancer and I started thinking critically. But it took cancer to do it. Literally, it took death knocking on my door, beating at my door, saying, you're going to die, for me to actually wake up and think to myself, what am I doing? What am I actually believing here? Because when you have cancer, it's a body, mind, and spirit disease. So you have to come to the realization that you are sick in all three categories. That's why you got the cancer. Your body, mind, and spirit have been toxified. You have to rethink, or you will keep the disease, because the disease is from not being aware of these aspects of yourself. And so, yes, it was very important to start thinking critically and become objective in my life in order to begin to understand what it means to be a human being. That's really it. Yeah.
I want to come right back to the cancer just 1 minute. Just one more quick question about the earlier days. Did you and your dad ever get into the understanding or dissection of how we got the Bible and why certain books are in versus out? And did that become a part of any of your early deconstruction, or was it kind of like until you really deconstructed with the cancer situation, it was just like the Bible is clearly from a God, it's clearly flawless, and it's clearly his love story to us? Did those questions come up earlier?
Great question. For me, it was the psychology and philosophy that was really the icebreaker. I deconstructed Christianity in my book using pure psychology. There is no theology in my book. I did not approach, and my leaving Christianity had nothing to do with theology. It was purely a psychological exercise, and realizing that if I believe that I'm a sinner, I will become and act like a sinner. So I am the instigating force. And so the only reason why I'm acting like a sinner is because psychologically I think that I'm a sinner. And that has nothing to do with theology. That is purely psychology, because we become what we believe that we are. So if you think you're fat, you're going to become fat because that's what you think about yourself. So if you think you're a sinner, you're going to become a sinner and act like a sinner because that's what you think about yourself. And so this is the personal accepting of your own, how you have instigated this issue with yourself. You have to come to terms with that to leave the religion by identifying how I'm thinking psychologically. And so for me, I didn't have deep theological talks with my father. He would give me answers. You know, I'd ask him and he'd be able to point to verses quickly. I mean, my father's a master with the Bible, so he could lay things out theologically. But the interesting thing is, my father has no psychological awareness, which is interesting. He has no idea what it actually means when I say the words, Dad, when you think you're a sinner, you're going to act like one. He's not going to be able to put that together because he's identifying through this theological idea rather than understanding the psychology that undergirds the theology. And so for me, that's how I got out, was through the psychology, not through any theology.
I guess what I mean, just to clarify, there is more of less psychological versus theological, but academic information. For example, we grew up knowing that the book of Enoch was quoted like 2 or 3 times in the New Testament, but in part of my deconstruction was discovering it's actually quoted like 200 times in the New Testament. You learn that a lot of academics don't think that all the epistles of Paul were written by the Apostle Paul.
Mm-hmm.
You learn that there weren't 4 gospels, there was like 60 and arguably hundreds, and the 4 that were chosen, we don't know who wrote them. And there's a lot of other stuff that comes into that, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, the Essenes, a lot of other books that are quoted, Jubilees, other churches that would have bigger canons than ours. I assume we probably have the same canon, but churches that would have a different canon. Again, the Ethiopian church never lost the Book of Enoch. It's always been in their canon.
Yeah.
So when you look at that stuff, is your dad an academic? I mean, I know he can like quote Greek and probably some Hebrew too, but like, is he a pure academic in any sense where he's just like, I don't want to go to this just saying, thus saith the Lord. I want to actually have a scientific approach to this too that says, I want to be able to back this up rationally. Does this make sense? Why are we looking at these 4 gospels and not the other 60? Why are we calling it Matthew when we don't know who wrote it? Why are we looking at 1st and 2nd Timothy for the pastoral epistles when there's a lot of reason to think Paul didn't even write these books and we don't know who wrote them? Why are there 13 different endings to the book of Mark, Gospel of Mark? Does he dive into that stuff, or at least is privately with you? Like, there's more to this, and I'm kind of like jittered by the academic side of it.
No, not at all. No, not at all. My father doesn't question those things. My father, when he went to Dallas Theological Seminary, took that as the gospel law forever, no question. And so any of these questions you're asking, those are just completely obfuscated. The whole point, like I said, my father's not a philosopher. He's not into psychology. And those kind of things you're talking about are part of that whole thinking process of questioning and not just accepting. And my father is an obeyer. He obeys, he's obedient. And so when he goes to the seminary and they say, hey, this is the canon and this is why they did it, he's like, okay. And there's no, hey, I want to go into that space. I want to check it out for myself. I want to look around. Is what you're saying really true? Should it just be 66 books? Like, what's really, my father doesn't question like that. He obeys. So he finds his authority. The authorities were Dallas Theological Seminary for him, and they gave him the law. And by golly, he carried that out the rest of his life. And to this day, that is the final thing. My father doesn't question any of the things you just talked about. That discussion you just were mentioning, that would never happen. And as a matter of fact, it would frustrate him if I began to go to him at this point and say, hey, Dad, did you know that there are books? And he obviously would know. But if I approached him, started asking that, he would be like, Chuck, why are you asking me this stuff? That, there's a reason for all of the way that it is now. And it's the way that it is now because they were very careful craftsmen in our past that very carefully made sure that the Bible was pure and perfect, and we were delivered the perfect book that would deliver the rest of the world and liberate the world. And you do not question that, Chuck. These are authorities. They knew better than us, and they knew what books to include. This is it. Why are you questioning it? Why are you even making it an issue? This is the truth. And that's really the way it was for me. And so because that's the way I was with my father, man, by the time I'm 12, 13 years old, I'm the same exact way as him. I think like him. I am like him. Because as a child, you want that. Like, I had a great relationship with my father. We went fishing together. We did all kinds of things together. When I was 8, 9, 10 years old, my father and I had a beautiful relationship. And so I modeled my thinking after him as any kid would. Like, my father was my hero and I loved him to death. I love him to death. And so when you're like that as a child, you want to think like them. You want to be like them. At least that's the way it was for me. And that's the way I became. I went into high school and I was this Bible beaten truth, talking guy. And I knew Jesus was the way. And there was no critical thinking going on. And so that's really the way it was. No, my father does not ask those questions. He doesn't pursue those things. I mean, he's written something like 120, 130 original books.
Yep.
That's what he did with his time. He wasn't researching the origins of Christianity. He was taking what he learned, the laws that he learned, and applying them into books so that people could then apply that to their own life. None of this philosophy, critical thinking stuff was going on with him. And he spent his time writing. That's really what writing and preaching. That's what he did.
If I could just make a quick comment, and I want to get to the cancer because I know we're running out of time, but just a quick comment on your dad. And again, I want to be careful how I phrase this, but I think there's a point at which we need to be a little bit more like, call it what it is. And I don't mean to call it your dad, because there's a lot of people, my own father, he's already passed, but my own father would have fallen in a similar category. But when you are at a spot where you are leading thousands and eventually, probably arguably in his case, millions of people into this worldview, and you haven't asked some of the most basic questions about where this religion came from, and look, for example, just asking, is there any chance that they're copying from somewhere else? Like it shocked me that I realized that they're lifting passages and structure right from Homer's Odyssey into the Gospels and Acts. Like, where are they copying from? Where is this coming from? What was the genre? Like, I assume your dad does not talk probably that much about the Greco-Roman mystery cults and about, the Dionysius cults, and how that's clearly woven in dozens of times into the Gospels.
Yeah.
If you're going to lead millions of people into this worldview, and you're not even going to ask the most basic questions about where did this even come from, and what has been the custody of this, who's had custody of these texts, how do we know they were preserved? Not what did my pastor tell me to, this has been preserved by God, but how do I know who has altered the text? And how would you know? How would you know from the first 400, 500 years of AD? How would you know if it was truly the original text? And when you mix all that together, I have to say that your dad basically, and a lot of other pastors with him, is basically a cult leader, leading millions of people astray into an extremely toxic worldview, and trying to say, don't look behind the curtain. There's no wizard there. There's nothing to worry about. And I feel bad for him. I can't help but feel bad for him. Again, he influenced my life. He was almost like a father to me from a distance. I've listened to him for thousands and thousands of hours as a kid and a teenager. But looking back now, I'd be like, you have truly, in the words of Paul, if Christ is not raised, you're of all people to be most pitied. Your dad is pitiable. It is such a shame that but he's both wasted his life on mythology, but then he's turned and led millions of people in turn into mythology, and they have one short life and then nothing else, and he's made them waste their own lives. I mean, if you're going to look at the word culpability, your dad's got a lot of culpability on his shoulders, and I know he'll never admit that or confess it or make it right or make amends. He'll go to his death, I'm sure, proclaiming Jesus as Lord. But man, oh man, if he could wake up, I think if I were in his shoes, I'd be like, what the hell have I done with, oh my God, there's no God. What have I done? I mean, I'm sure he can't capture that or think through that. But
no, the Christian would never think of themselves as responsible in that way, because they really think that what they're teaching is love and truth. And so there would never be a self-analysis like that. Again, philosophy and psychology, it's not going to be the Christian's strong suit. And that kind of self-awareness would only come to a person after a tremendous amount of change and rethinking about themselves and their life. Objectively, you are absolutely correct. And I came to the conclusion that Christianity was a cult also, because it is a cult. And though the Christian, they would never, ever, ever say that or admit that. I mean, as I remember when I was a Christian, I actually, this is funny you mentioned this, because I actually had a talk with my father about cults. And this was when I was in my early 20s. And I asked him, we were talking about cults, and I said to him, well, Dad, what is a cult? How would you define a cult? And he would say, okay, typically a cult is a group that has one man who's the leader. They typically have one book that they follow, and they don't allow any other book. And they're typically very intolerant of anyone who is outside the cult. And I remember looking at him right at that point, and I said, Dad, isn't that how Christianity works? And he started laughing. He said, no. He said, no, Christianity is far too large to be a cult. A cult would never have hundreds of millions of people following it over thousands of years of time. That's not a cult, Chuck. And this is the blindness that comes along with someone who is completely indoctrinated into a religion. They would never self-analyze like that and admit, actually, this does fit the exact model of a cult. And coming to that self-awareness, it's just impossible. And that's why they don't leave. There's no self-critical aspect going on here. There's no questioning of the basic tenets and theology of the belief. You simply follow and obey. And so at the end of the day, you're just not going to get that kind of self-awareness from the Christian. And that is really hard to come to terms with. And that was hard for me, is that kind of idea, is becoming aware. And dude, this is why I left my life. I realized, holy smokes, I'm a part of a cult. I am a part of a system that is teaching people these things that I know are false and are a really bad psychological and philosophical idea. And I became aware of that, and I realized I am serving in a ministry, and the recordings I am making are going to millions of people, and I am part and parcel of that. And it was that self-awareness that caused me to be like, I'm going to abandon my entire life because I cannot continue doing this. I love the public. I love humanity too much to continue to put this kind of seed, this kind of poisonous thinking into them. I will not be a coward and stay in that. I'm going to leave. And I left a salary job, guaranteed retirement. I mean, I had everything set up. I had a beautiful home. It was going to gain in value over time. And basically, if I just stayed in that system for 20 more years, I was on the highway. That was it. I had made it, quote unquote, in life. You just follow the rest of the way through. You're going to retire and you're all good. And the impetus was so strong when I realized that, because I became objective and used philosophy and psychology to understand that, I was able to build the courage to leave. And that really is what each and every Christian has to come to terms with to leave, is this self-awareness and realizing I am a part of something that is actually psychologically extremely harmful. And it actually encourages bot behavior and bot activity in one's own life, and you're not even aware of it when you're in it, you see. And so this is so important, and one of the reasons why I do what I do is to try and seed in people, hey, here's a larger perspective, and you don't even have to look at it theologically. This is just basic psychology, basic philosophy, and I can show you a larger world if you're just willing to look around in this space that I can show you. And you don't have to do anything but just simply observe. And that is tough to get them to even walk into the room and see it, to be honest with you, Tim. It's hard.
It is. It's very hard. Can I just make one quick comment? And then I want to get to the cancer part of your story, because that's a big linchpin in this. But what you said about your dad's objection, why Christianity is not a cult, it's funny. When you said that, it raised a lot of memory bells for me of the moment of my deconversion. I deconverted in September of 2019. So it's been a few years now. But I'd basically been researching the origins of Christianity for like 3 years before that. It had started with, we're sitting around singing with your kids as you do during Bible time, singing Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, and I'm cringing inside thinking I have to teach them someday that genocide and land theft and slavery and stoning and child brides is okay, because it is according to Yahweh. It's not just okay, it's commanded. I'm cringing, but that wasn't enough to deconvert me. 3 years I'm studying. I'm sitting at my computer on a Saturday morning, and literally it was like a jungle beat starts beating in my head. I don't think this is real. I don't think is it possible? And I was literally talking to myself, is it possible that this isn't real? And my first big objection was exactly what your dad said. I said, there is no way that this many people are deceived for 2,000 years, and really more if you include Judaism. There's no way. And my immediate thought was, well, wait a second. Hinduism's been around for a lot longer than both. We think they're all wrong and going to hell. Buddhism, same scenario.
There you go, being
Muslims.
Objective, Tim.
And I'm like, and I literally was like, it's not a good reason. The fact that just because a cult gets big doesn't mean it's not a cult. And I literally, like, immediately, I thought of a few other quick things. I was like, is it possible that this is not real? And it was like this voice inside me was whispering at first and eventually shouting, say the words, Tim, say the goddamn words. It's not real. And as soon as I said it in my head, I was like, it's not real. And it was like all the dominoes just fell in that 1 second. And all these questions like, why does the Bible not make sense? Why is Jesus against Moses? And is Jesus with Yahweh? Is Jesus Yahweh? Jesus knows everything because he's God, but he doesn't know the day or the hour of his second coming. Like, well, all these questions. And why is genocide okay, but now it's not? Polygamy is okay, but now it's not. Endless millions of questions probably. And as soon as I said it's not real, like, oh, that's why this worldview is not going to make sense, because it's never going to make sense. It's just man-made mythology and man-made evolved culture. It's like, that makes more sense. And I know I went to Bible college to be a pastor. I wanted to follow in your dad's footsteps. He and John MacArthur were my heroes for 20 years, literally. And
Wow.
so I had spent my life preparing to basically do what he did. And yet it didn't make sense. And as soon as it hit, like, it's not real, all these things experientially and theologically and rationally, suddenly it all fell together. It's like, that's why it doesn't make sense. And that's why his yoke is actually not easy and his burden isn't light. And there is no joy for so many people. And there is no power. We pretend there's power in the gospel, but I see miserable, ugly Christians for 30 years around me. Where is the power? All these objections suddenly is like, you can object all you want. It's never going to make sense. So stop trying. And as soon as I said it, I was out. I mean, that hour I was fully deconverted. It wasn't like, well, let's investigate some more stuff. I did my 3 years of investigating. And at that point, it's like, that's it. This is mythology. And it made more sense to me. And I had more peace in that hour and in that day than I had in 43 years as a Christian. More peace. Wow. Insane. But it just, I can definitely relate to your dad's objection. And when you think about it, even just for a second rationally, it's one of the stupidest objections out there. Just because a cult gets big does not give it any validity at all. Yeah. Anyway, could you, if you want to respond to any of that, feel free. And then if you could, after that, take us into the story about your cancer and kind of how this blew up into a deconversion.
Yeah, well, that's a story. So I was already, by the time I contracted cancer in 2011, 2012, I was already I had already been down the road of questioning Christianity. So cancer was basically the final linchpin, but it was a part of the cracking of my mind that had been taking place through my later 30s. I have a really bad back, and I started having spasms in my mid 30s. And I remember thinking to myself, if I'm in my mid 30s and I'm having back spasms, I am doomed. And so that really began to make me think about my health. I started changing my eating habits. I began to lose weight. I began to get in shape. I went to the gym, started running. And that all happened from about age 33 to about 38 or so. And I was really, and by the time I was 39, 40, I was in amazing shape. Like, I had really stayed with it. I was, and I still am reasonably shaped. I mean, I've never let that go. But I had already been going through the whole physical transformation that happened to me in my mid 30s. And so within that time frame, some life events happened and some things went on in my life that caused me to begin to dabble in a few psychedelics like cannabis and mushrooms. And those psychedelic drugs begin to help you think outside the box. They begin to break down thought patterns. And if you use them efficaciously like I did, they were extremely helpful in helping me begin to assess myself and start looking more closely at what do I believe and who really am I and why am I really here, and asking these basic fundamental questions that these meditative states get you into. And so by the time I contracted cancer, I was already beginning to kind of think, what is this about Christianity? Is this really true? But I still was a Christian, still absolutely believed that you had to have Jesus to go to heaven. I still believed in the theology. I just was beginning to kind of question it a little bit for the first time ever. And this was age 37, 38 that I was doing this, so late. And so then I got cancer, and then cancer was like an accelerator, and it just forced me into deeper and deeper philosophy and psychology of my life, because as a 40-year-old man with young kids that I'm raising, I'm now feeling very responsible. Like, I have to be healthy. I have to be better. I want to be these kids' dad. I need to be their dad. And so there's this tremendous pressure to heal and tremendous pressure to get better. And so, because cancer is a body, mind, spirit disease, I personally began to look at my physical behavior. What am I eating? What am I exposed to? What are the toxins that are around me? And then the mind aspect. What am I believing? Where am I putting my energy and my thoughts? What's the psychology of what I'm doing? Why am I sick? What did my thoughts have to do with my getting sick? Because, thinking and getting sick is, synonymous. And then the spiritual side. What do I believe? Who is God? What is God? What is there a God? Like, all of these questions, and this is sad, but these were the first time I was juggling these questions as a 40-year-old man. I mean, that's sad, but it's true. That's the way it was for me. And then the cancer was just this constant impetus to keep going. You can't quit. You have to get better. There's no stopping. It wasn't like being on a diet or something where it's just like, okay, I'm not going to think about my diet today. You think about cancer and healing 24/7. It becomes everything in your world to get better because you want to be better, because you love others around you and you love yourself. You want to be healthy. And so it was an amazing teacher. For me, cancer, it was a gift. And I know a lot of people hate cancer, and I'm not objecting that. I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm just saying for me personally, I really took it on as a friend and a teacher. And I took it on as a way of learning and thinking outside of the ways I had always thought. And having death at my door every day and not knowing if I was going to wake up with, an even further worse cancer in my lungs, cancer in my brain, cancer in my lymphatics, because it was going to move into my body eventually if I didn't get better from it. And so this held me accountable every day, holding me accountable for every thought, holding me accountable for every action, everything I'm eating. And it's really an initiation is what it was. An initiation into deeper thinking, deeper philosophy, and getting outside of this tiny little golf ball sized world I had lived in my entire life. And so it really builds self-responsibility and self-accountability is what the cancer did. And like I said, an amazing teacher, an amazing teacher. And when you can approach cancer in that way, and you can accord death and basically say to yourself, I'm okay if I die. I'm okay if that happens. But at the same time, I want to live and I want to pursue health. When you can begin to be in both spaces and not have any anxiety with either, you're getting to the point. And that's the point in life where you can live without fear, without anxiety, because no extreme takes you. And you begin to walk that middle ground between the yin yang, that gray line that isn't caught up in all the black and isn't caught up in all the white, but it's just going with it at the center of the wheel where there is no movement. And you can stay in that center by being accorded with death. And so that's really what happened when I got sick and when I got cancer and pulled me out of that tiny little world that I had been caught up in. Joseph Campbell was a very key figure in my life. Joseph Campbell, his Mythos series on DVD was life-changing for me. And I watched that while I had cancer. And it was this beautiful approach to life that Joe has which is pure philosophy, pure psychology, no religion, just this pure, hey, pay attention to what you're thinking, what you're seeing, what you're observing, look more deeply into the world. There's more to it than the surface layer, but without getting caught up in all this God idea, but just truly in this fully experiencing idea and giving myself completely to life and all the risks that it holds, and doing that boundlessly without any anxiety. And that's to truly live joyful. And that's really what Joe helped me understand as I was, as you said earlier, finding this other way of going about understanding the world and the bigger picture without a religion to center upon, but rather just centering upon my own heart and my own inner standing. And that really was the transformation for me.
What was the conversation like with your dad once he heard about the cancer diagnosis? And is it correct to say that you went more of an alternative medicine route versus the traditional medicine? And could you just elaborate? I think I heard that was the discussions of how you treated it was a big diverting point. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I used naturopathy, yoga, acupuncture. These were some of the critical elements, coffee enemas and doing the Gerson method and theory. That's how I treated the reason why I got the cancer. To me, it didn't make any sense to just go and have the tumor removed and never address why I grew the tumor. So yeah, absolutely. If you need to have the tumor removed or whatever, fine. But you need to resolve why you grew that tumor, because the tumor is the flowering of cancer. It's not the cancer. It's the flowering of the dysfunction that is going on to cause the tumor. So for me, this was common sense. So my approach was, I'm going to fight it naturopathically as long as I can. And then if I can't shrink the tumor, drain the tumor, or get rid of it in one way or another, then I'll have it removed. And so for me, I went through that process about 8 months of purifying and clarifying, the body, mind, and spirit, which is the holistic approach. And When I initially started on that, I mean, I started early that way. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I already was going down that path. So when I approached my father on this, and I went, I'll never forget, I went to his house with my wife, right when I was diagnosed, or 2 days after. And when I told him that I was going to reject all Western medicine, I wasn't going to take the advice of any Western doctor, I was never going to get chemo, and I was never going to do these terrible things that they do to people that have cancer. And so my father, though, he's an obeyer. He does as told. And so when you get sick, you go to a doctor. You don't look at yourself and figure out how you get better. You find out from the doctor how to get better. And that's how my father was. And so when I said I'm going to reject the doctor, my father had no time for that. Like, that is not what you do. You obey your authorities. And so there began a seed between us of very, very strong disagreement in my approach. He obviously loved me. He obviously wasn't chastising me or any of that, but he made it very clear, I do not agree with what you're doing, and I really stand against what you're doing. But I love you as my son, and I totally support you, and all those things. And he did support me, and they were right there for me. They helped me financially, the whole thing, because it's expensive to fight it with naturopathy. So absolutely was there, but at the philosophical, psychological level, my father was completely against it. And that, I guess, in many ways helped me break away. It made it easier to start thinking for myself and begin to, see my dad as a peer rather than as, dad, but just as a peer, a friend, a person, that I interact with, but not as this authoritative figure that I obey. And it began to help me see my father more like that. And I think that's healthy. I think we need to see our parents more as peer to peer than as our authority, because you're not going to be asking your parents as a 30-year-old if you should buy a car or not. That's your decision. And so in the same way with your life. And so this helped our relationship in that sense. But at the same time, it was also costly. My father and I had always related through Jesus and Christianity, and leaving that began to form, a stigma between us, a barrier between us. And that will never go away. I mean, that's just the way that it is. And my father disagrees with me, obviously.
Well, what was like the first conversation there where you actually kind of spilled the beans and kind of said, I don't think the Bible's divine, or I'm questioning the whole worldview? What was that first conversation like, and how did those evolve?
Yeah. Okay. So the first time my father found out that I was leaving Christianity was when I was actually still working at the church. I had just healed from cancer. I had been diagnosed cancer-free, and it was about 2 or 3 weeks after. And obviously, he has a large radio ministry that he's a part of, and he had been telling people about it. So he had been talking about it on. So there were millions of people around the world that knew I had cancer. And so when I was healed of it, he came into my office at work one afternoon, because he had asked me to write a letter telling my cancer story, and he wanted to be able to present this letter to everyone who had been writing them and asking them about my journey. And so I had finished the letter, and I had given him the letter. And so he came to my office on a Saturday afternoon when I was working. I was prepping for the show on Sunday. And he came into my office and he said, "Chuck, I want to talk to you." I was like, okay. And so we sat down, and he had the letter in his hand. And he looked at me, and I'm sitting at my desk, and he's across from me in a chair. And he says, "Chuck, I just read your letter." And he holds it up, and he said, "It's a great letter. I really appreciate you writing it. And it really means a lot that you would do this for us. We really appreciate it. But I have one question that's a really big concern." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Chuck, in this entire letter, you never one time, not only you don't mention Jesus, but you don't even talk about how Jesus helped you get better from cancer." And I paused, and I looked right at my father, and I said to him, "Well, Dad, that's because Jesus had nothing to do with my healing from cancer." And my father looked at me like I was a ghost. He had this incredulous look of, I don't even know what I just heard. He couldn't even comprehend it. And he looked at me in the way that my father does, and he just goes, "What?" And I said, "Dad, I mean, I was the one doing coffee enemas. I was the one doing yoga. I was the one who went to the acupuncturist. I was the one who changed all my eating habits. I was the one who lost 50 pounds that I didn't need to lose. I was the one who did the necessary physical work to heal from cancer. And Dad, that has nothing to do with Jesus. That is my physical participation and risking myself in life. That's a personal endeavor. And here we're getting right into psychology. And my dad was like, Chuck, how can you be saying this? And the conversation basically just went downward, just one step after another, as I got fully more into perspective and psychology, and he got more into theology and the truth. And so he and it began this barrage of back and forth, and it got heated, and it wasn't nice. And it really was the beginning of basically the end. And he left upset, and I was still in my office, just kind of like, what now? And, I was at a job where you would literally have to sign a form that says, I believe in Jesus. I'm going to promote Jesus. I'm not going to talk derogatory about Jesus. I'm going to follow the laws of Jesus, and I will stay in relationship. I mean, this is, you sign your name to a document like this to work there. And I'm sitting there in this epiphany of realizing I'm pushing myself out of this. Like, this is actually happening because I refuse to bow. I refuse to just obey. I refuse to do as I'm told. I'm going to stay true to my heart and where my heart is leading me. And that really was the beginning of the end. It wasn't too much longer before my wife and I began to look for places outside of Texas, leaving my job and really having no idea what I was going to do. But I knew I was going to follow my heart, that no matter what, I'm going to follow my heart. And if it costs me financial ruin, if it costs me friendships, if it costs me relationships with my family, I will do that because I'm going to follow my heart, and I'm not going to deny that. And so it took that to get there.
Can I ask, what was it like when you actually got from the conversations of who healed your cancer, which is a pretty big stepping stone into a lot of other topics, I'm sure, but like, what was it like when it finally got to the point of, I'm just not a Christian? Like, when did that occur? Did he try to pull you back? And what have those conversations been like? Because it's one thing to say we're seeing this passage differently, or we're interpreting or applying this theology differently. It's another thing to say your worldview is completely mythology based, and Jesus isn't even real, and Yahweh's not real. He's never been real. You've been praying to the wall, and you're a cult leader in a mythology based worldview group. It's like it gets intense when you get to that bigger level of saying we're not talking about cancer anymore. We're talking about the Bible and Jesus and Christianity. What was that like?
For me, it was pure heart driven, pure heart base. I mean, I was never taken with theology. I was never bought into. I never wanted to be a pastor. I never wanted to be a preacher. I'm not that kind of person. I don't test well. I'm not good with those kind of things you need to be good at in order to be a theologian. And so it wasn't attractive to me. What was attractive to me was that Christianity offered answers, quote unquote. And you could ask the question, why am I here? And just read this verse, read this verse, read this verse, and you got your answer. And this whole self-analysis and self-responsibility is just not something that enters the Christian's head. They turn all responsibility to Jesus. They turn their responsibility for everything that they do, misbehavior in their life. They just ask for forgiveness and, Jesus, please help me to behave better in the future. And please help me not to do that again. Please help me. You never take self-responsibility. It is always reaching out towards this external idea. And so that was never really an issue for me. It was more like, where's my heart in this? And where's my heart leading me? And since all I knew was Christianity, I just molded my heart into that form. So I accepted the fact that I'm a sinner. I accepted the fact that I'm fallen. And then I have this beautiful love relationship with Jesus because Jesus forgives me for my sin. And so you just kind of wallow in that. And that becomes enough. And it becomes enough in the sense that you never do the self-responsibility thing like you've been talking about, Tim, and it's been undergirding everything you've been saying. And that is, where is the self-responsibility here in actually looking at what you're doing and what you're promoting and what you're saying to these people? That is not healthy and it's not a good idea. I mean, you never come to that place, Tim. You never come to that place because you think, I've got the answer. I've got the solution. I'm right. Everyone else is wrong. This is how you do it. This is the way. Why are you rejecting this? It's so easy. It's a gift. All you have to do is accept it and you're good. And it's this kind of dumbed down approach to life, non-philosophical, non-psychological approach to life that allows you, that gives license for you to behave and act and think in such an irresponsible way. Yeah. And so my father would never, Tim, he would never see himself as irresponsible. He would never see himself as a part of a cult, ever. He would never enter his mind, ever, Tim. It wouldn't matter what you showed him. It's just like that verse that in the Bible where it says, even if the rocks scream out at the lost person, they won't hear it. And that's exactly the way the Christian sees it. They see themselves as found. And so even if the rocks cry out to them of truth, look, you need to understand the Bible is an assembly line, man. It's just a concoction of all kinds of history thrown into it. And it's so obvious. And the Christian will never get to the place where they will self-analyze like that because, like you said, Tim, as soon as that foundation starts breaking away and they start realizing what they actually are standing on, that is scary as F. Scary as F. And as soon as they find themselves in that place, they run from it because now they're going to have to start answering the hard questions and they don't want to and they can't do that. Well, they've always had the answer. So sorry, I hope that answered the question.
No, that's great. I know we're at time. I wanted to ask you just one quick last question if I could, and then if you want to add another comment if that to kind of wrap us up. But just if I could, this has been on my mind, so I want to make sure I kind of slip it in here at the end. You're at the spot where you are an apostate and a heretic to your dad. You are, as we started with, you are bound now for hell because you are not a believer. And we know once you've left the one sacrifice, once you've left the knowledge of the truth, there's no more sacrifice for sins, and you have turned away from the one true Savior, which means you're now still condemned for your sins, and therefore you are on the way to hell, as am I. One of the things that comes into this equation is that the Christians who believe they're going to go to heaven believe that when they get there, they're going to be glorified, which means they're going to agree with God in everything and be like him. When you see Jesus face to face, you will rejoice, but you'll also be like him. You'll be transformed. You'll be glorified, and you will see the white hot holiness of God for what it is, the wonderfulness that it is, and his hatred of sin and how much it deserved punishment as a good thing. You will rejoice that he punishes evildoers. And so technically, Christians who go to heaven are going to have to agree with God that when he sends people or lets people go to hell that he created, when he sends people there, or they send them themselves there, if they want to phrase that and do mental gymnastics, when they get there, that the Christians in heaven are going to be aware of it probably in some way, but to whatever extent they are aware of it, they're going to have to say, God, I rejoice that you are punishing sin. And you're doing it the way you're doing it. And it does deserve conscious torment, eternal conscious torment. Therefore, your father is going to have to dance before Jesus in heaven with a smile on his face, knowing you're burning forever and that will never change. Have you addressed that topic with him? Or if not, what would he say to that, do you think? And do you think there's any sense of like, I am truly thinking and believing monstrous things? Like I say a lot on my channel, if you believe monstrous thoughts long enough, it turns you into a monster. If he were to say, I would dance with joy before my Lord and Savior while my son is burning, and I will never, ever be changing that mindset. My son deserves the punishment he rightly is getting because he is an apostate and heretic. He rejected his Savior. That he has turned himself into a monster who will basically, Yahweh at that point is a psychopath for creating hell, not giving you a second chance, for doing the whole 9 yards. And your dad has to say to this psychopath, you are actually, you, the abuser of all time, you are the definition of love. And I love you as you torture my son. How would he respond to that?
I don't know, Tim, if my father can get into that space. I think, well, first of all, he probably thinks, this is probably where he's concluded, and I know this is where my mother has landed. But I really believe they think in the terms that, I don't remember what the verse is, but it's this verse that once you've committed, once you've said the prayer and asked for forgiveness, even if you become an apostate, even if you reject and denounce Jesus, it doesn't matter. You already went through the process. You've already been baptized, or, the blood of Jesus has already been put upon you. You can't remove that. And so you'll be forgiven. God, when you get to heaven, even though you totally rejected God or renounced God, you still said the prayer as a 4-year-old, and that was the e-ticket. I know that's where my mother is. I don't know where my dad is exactly, but I know my mother, in order to live with herself, that's where she's landed, in just not believing that I'm going to go to hell. My father, he probably just simply doesn't go into that mind state in the same way that he doesn't go into the philosophical aspect or psychological. He just won't go into those final thought, like what you just perfectly described it, Tim, because that theologically that's exactly what's going to happen in his theology. So you're exactly right. I'm just saying that I don't believe my father can actually bring himself to facing that, to actually looking at it that hardcore and thinking that. I think he will probably dismiss it. I think he'll probably just say, well, Chuck served in the ministry. He was a Christian for 40 years. I mean, he just went off on this rampage. Lord knows what happened to him. It's too bad, but he'll go to heaven. The bigger question, though, or I think another good question is, what about the stranger? The stranger. We're to love everyone. Everyone is of value. I mean, if you look at Christianity and the way Jesus taught, I mean, every person is of value. Every person can be saved and all this. Nobody is less than kind of an idea. So, that person is just as valuable as me. That's what I'm establishing here. The stranger is just as valuable as me as a person. Well, then why isn't an issue there? And I just simply think, and this is the way that most of them think, is it's just dismissal. It's just denying that reality, acting like that's actually not going to happen, and just living in this blissful emptiness of not critically thinking it through and just getting this imaginative idea in your head that somehow it's just going to work out. It's just, they're going to be forgiven. Somehow it's just going to work out, and they actually will never face hell. And I really think that's how they conclude it, because Tim, I mean, you laid it out. That's the way that it is. So you can't, from a theological standpoint, argue the point you just made, because then you're a sadist, because that's what a sadist thinks. And Yahweh is a sadist. So, of course, in order to think like Yahweh, you have to become a sadist. And I just don't think the Christian can bring themselves to that place, because they're living in such, I mean, imagine, Tim, if your entire worldview and relationship to everything comes through your imagination, you can bend it any way you want. You can be as idealistic as you wish to be, because the world is just going to form into the way that your imagination cognizes. So you don't have to be held accountable. It's in your imagination. And this is how it potentiates over thousands of years. And this is why the religion is still here, because it's so easy to manipulate in your mind. It's imaginatory based. You really don't have to have all the facts. Just believe right and you're good, brother. And you never really have to pursue like you would in Buddhism or atheism or these disciplines where you really have to do some pursuit here. And you need to be really chasing knowledge and so forth, which is all healthy. You're not doing that in Christianity. You're memorizing verses. You're learning the edicts and you're learning how to speak the answers so that if anyone comes to you, you can just parrot that answer out. And so, yeah, there's not a whole lot of critical thinking going on there, Tim. So I'm not sure my father has ever come to the place where he ever actually has to face that question, to be truthful with you, unfortunately.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's amazing, just amazing the mind job that Christianity does to you. But I have I feel like I've got 100 other questions for you, but I know we're going to wrap up here, but could you just maybe give us a quick final word for anyone going through the hardest part of this? What would you say to them that just to say it's going to get better?
Yeah, I would say the more you realize and identify who you really are and the essence that you really are and this incredible opportunity that you present to the world and the gifts that you have, these things will bring you fulfillment. If I find the gifts, the natural things within me that I am inclined to and love, and I nurture and foster those, love will come out. Perspective and identity will render itself before you without your even having to try. So if I say I'm good at, or I want to take up an instrument, just engaging that instrument, learning to play it, the music, the harmony, the beauty that comes out of it will begin to reshape you. And it's in this way that you can find that love, passion, fulfillment, identity that we all long to seek as human beings because we have higher consciousness and this awareness faculty. And so don't abandon that. Pursue it, but you're not going to be able to pursue it in this religious context. You're going to have to pursue it from this personal context, this heart context, this awareness context. And so through these means and ways, man, there's a whole lot of love, understanding, fulfillment, and identity that can be found without having to believe anything, without having to follow anyone, without having to align yourself. And that's one of the big things I do on my page on YouTube, is I've presented videos that help people to just have a bigger awareness. And the larger your awareness of the world you're in, the larger your awareness of yourself becomes, because you realize you, nature, you, and the world are all cohesive, one together, and we're all in this together. And this builds unity, this builds connectivity, connection, and love that really foster us into really loving and compassionate beings over time. So that would be kind of an answer to that, what I would pursue and when asked that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a great answer. I love it. I love it. Well, again, I've got a lot of other questions, so I hope we can do a follow-up at some point.
Yeah,
But I do just want to wrap up. Just reminding everybody, please do check out Chuck's book. I'll have the link beneath this video. Please check out his YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and watch their support his great work there. But I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Chuck Swindoll Jr. Chuck, so good. It is an absolute honor to you have a beautiful heart, such an articulate voice. It is an honor to hear your story. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. It has been an honor. I've loved this recording. I'm actually going to get it from you. I'm going to post it on my site. This is great. I've really enjoyed this. This has been a great time. Thank you, Tim, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's do it again sometime. Thank you again.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.